During the 1996 Everest disaster, Andy Harris found himself in a tragic situation on the mountain. Despite the possibility of his survival, he made the decision to go back and help Rob Hall and Doug Hansen, who were in trouble high on the mountain. Maybe he could have survived had he not gone back to find his colleagues on that fateful day. It was his helpful nature that eventually led to his untimely death on Everest. This is his story. Andy Harris was a respected mountain guide from New Zealand. He was born on the 29th of September 1964. In his earlier years, he attended Francis Douglas Memorial College in New Plymouth. During the winter season in New Zealand, Harris used his skill as a helicopter skiing guide in the Southern Alps. During the summers, he used to work for the New Zealand Antarctic Study Program and made significant contribution as a field leader from 1987 to 1992. He worked for New Zealand scientists conducting geologic research in Antarctica. He also used to guide climbers in the Southern Alps of New Zealand. Harris climbed his first Himalayan peak in 1985 when he successfully reached the summit of Chobose, a formidable peak standing at 6,690 meters, about 30 miles west of Everest. In the fall of 1994, Andy Harris spent 4 months in Nepal, assisting his fiancée Fiona McPherson run a medical clinic. The clinic was funded by a foundation called the Himalayan Rescue Association, primarily to treat altitude-related illnesses. It also offered free treatment to the local Sherpas and to educate trekkers about the insidious hazards of ascending too high too fast. The clinic had been established in 1973 after 4 members of a single Japanese trekking group succumbed to the altitude and died in the vicinity. Before leaving for Everest in 1996, Andy Harris was living with Fiona McPherson in New Zealand. They were in the process of building a house in the hills outside of Queenstown. When Rob offered him the job of guidance on Everest, he was ambivalent about accepting it. It was quite hard for him to leave Fiona in the house. They had just gotten the roof on. But how could he turn down a chance to climb Everest? Especially when he had an opportunity to work with somebody like Rob Hall. The magnetic pull of the mountain was too strong for him to resist. Although Harris had never been to Everest before, he was no stranger to the Himalaya. Despite it being his first attempt at an 8,000-meter mountain, he had an extensive climbing experience in the Southern Alps of New Zealand. With neither Eddie Vistors nor Guy Carter available in 1996, Rob Hall employed Mike Groom and Andy Harris as guides to work alongside him on the mountain. Rob Hall's adventure consultants team consisted of 8 paying clients and 3 guides. They were Rob Hall, New Zealand, leader and head guide; Mike Groom, Australia, guide; Andy Harris, New Zealand, guide; John Krakauer, USA, journalist and client; Doug Hansen, USA, client; Yasuku Namba, Japan, client; Beck Weathers, USA, client; Luca Shishki, USA, client; Frank Peshbeck, Hong Kong, client; Dr. Stuart Hutchison, Canada, client; Dr. John Tusk, Australia, client; Nancy Hutchison, Canada, trekker; Susan Allen, Australia, trekker; Dr. Caroline Mackenzie, New Zealand, base camp doctor; Helen Welton, New Zealand, base camp manager; Ang Dorje Sherpa, Nepal, climbing Sardar. In addition, there were 10 Sherpas who were assisting the expedition. Even before reaching base camp, Andy Harris suffered from multiple gastrointestinal attacks Despite being advised to stay for one another night, he chose to proceed to base camp with the rest of the team on the 8th of April 1996. On the 8th of May, both Hall's team and Fisher's team departed Camp 2 and started the typical ascent of the roofs of the Lord's Face. 2,000 feet above the floor of the western combe, just below Camp 3, a boulder the size of a small television came rocketing down from the cliffs above and struck Harris in the chest. It knocked him off his feet and left him dangling from the fixed line in a state of shock for several minutes. Had he not been cleft in with a Juma, he would have certainly fallen to his death. Hall's Everest expedition proceeded without incident until the afternoon of May 10. Shortly after midnight on May 10, the expedition began the summit push from Camp 4 atop the South Col. They were joined by two other parties, Scott Fisher's Mountain Madness and a Taiwanese team. As the climbers from 3 expeditions attempted to reach the summit, they quickly encountered a series of problems and delays. Upon reaching the Hillary Stiff, the climbers found that no PEX ropes had been placed, and they were forced to wait for an hour while the guides installed the ropes. Things began to go seriously wrong. With a large number of climbers on the move at the same time, there were bottlenecks at the single fixed line at the Hillary Stiff. As crucial time spent on laying new roofs, the tight scheduling for the climb began to slip. Many other climbers had not yet reached the summit by 2 p.m. Andy Harris reached the summit at around 1:12 p.m. Anatoly Bukriev was already on the summit waiting for clients. Neil Bidelman and Martin Adams arrived at the top at 1:25 p.m. At around 1:25 p.m., Harris and John Krakauer started their descent. Rob Hall, Mike Groom, and Yasuko Namba reached the summit at around 2:10 p.m. and Hall radioed Helen Wilton at base camp to give her the good news. Wilton notified the Adventure Consultants Office in New Zealand, and a flurry of faxes went out to friends and families around the world, announcing the expedition's triumphant culmination. A while later, Mike Groom and Yasuko Namba began their descent, while Rob was waiting for Doug Hansen to arrive as the weather was turning bad. At 3 p.m., with clients still climbing far below, Hall Sardar, Ang Dorje, and other climbing Sherpas who had been waiting at the top began their descent from the summit. On the way down, Ang Dorje came across Doug Hansen from Hall's party above the Hillary Stiff. Dorje ordered him to descend, but he refused. Exactly 1 year earlier, Hall had torn Hansen around the south summit at 2:30 p.m. due to time constraints and bad weather. At about 3:15 p.m. at the south summit, John Krakauer saw Andy Harris sorting through a pile of orange oxygen bottles. Krakauer asked him for a fresh bottle, but Harris replied that all bottles were empty. In fact, all cylinders were full, but Harris was suffering from hypoxia and acting irrationally. Scott Fisher reached the summit at around 3:40 p.m. on the afternoon of May 10. His Sardar, Lapsing Jangbo Sherpa, was waiting for him at the top. Around this time, Makalugao and 2 Sherpas of the Taiwanese team arrived at the summit. Fisher was not feeling well. About 3:55 p.m., he started his descent. Shortly after Fisher left the summit, Gao and his Sherpas departed as well, and finally Lapsing headed down, leaving Hall alone on the summit awaiting Doug Hansen. Around 4 p.m., Hansen finally appeared, moving up painfully slowly. Hall hurried down to help him the final 40 feet to the summit. Both stayed only a minute or two at the summit, and then turned to begin their long descent. Hall sent his Sherpas down to assess the other clients, and stated that he would remain to help Hansen. Although he knew that it could prove fatal, he made the decision to stay with his client. 100 meters down the summit, Hansen ran out supplemental oxygen. He and Hall had been on the mountain quite longer than planned. Doug Hansen had expended every last bit of his strength to reach the summit. Now there was nothing left in reserve to make it back to Camp 4. At 4:30 p.m., Hall got on the radio to say that he and Hansen were in trouble high on the summit ridge and urgently needed oxygen. He remained with Hansen and tried to bring the nearly helpless climb down without gas. Mike Groom tried to call Rob on the radio, but Mike's transmitter was working only intermittently and he couldn't raise anybody. Shortly before 5 p.m., Groom finally managed to get through to Hall and communicate that there actually was oxygen at the south summit. 15 minutes later, lapsing jumbo Sherpa, a Pesher's team, arrived at the south summit on his way down from the top and encountered Harris. At this point, Harris must have finally understood that at least 2 of the oxygen canisters stashed there were full. Andy Harris offered lapsing jumbo Sherpa $500 to climb Hillry's step and take oxygen to Rob Hall and Doug Hansen, who were in dire need of it. But Lapsing couldn't help out Harris and replied that he had to take care of his group. Around 5 p.m., a moderate storm struck the southwest base of Everest, dropping visibility and wiping out the trail back to Camp 4. Winds were blowing at 75 miles per hour. Snow was coming down so hard that they couldn't see more than a couple of steps ahead, and they had to scream to be heard by someone standing at their side. Temperatures had plummeted and they were disoriented. Several clients got lost and well up the normal descent route. Shortly afterward, Hall radioed for help, saying that Hansen had fallen unconscious but was still alive. At 5:30 p.m., as Lapsing left the south summit to resume his descent, he turned to see Harris, who had been severely weakened, trudging slowly up the summit ridge carrying water and supplemental oxygen to assist Rob and Hansen. It was an act of extreme heroism that would cost Harris his life. Unsure whether there was oxygen waiting for him, Hall decided that the best course of action was to remain with Hansen and try to bring the nearly helpless client down without bottled oxygen. But when they got to the top of the Hillary step, Hall couldn't get Hansen down the 40-foot vertical drop, and their progress ground to a halt. When Krakauer returned to Camp 4 and suffering from hypoxia, he believed he had encountered Harris on the ridge above the camp. Krakauer recalled seeing him fall over the ridge to camp, then stand up and stagger back in the direction of the camp. Meanwhile, Krakauer took a longer route back to the tents and informed Stuart Hutchison at the camp that Harris had safely returned to Camp 4. Hutchison had radioed this news to base camp, and from there it was passed along via satellite phone to Fiona McPherson in New Zealand. She had been overcome with relief when she learned that Harris was safe at Camp 4. However, Hall's wife, Jane Arnold, in Christchurch, called McPherson back to inform her that there had been a horrible mistake, that Andy was in fact missing and presumed dead. Krakauer's error had greatly and unnecessarily compounded the fate of Fiona McPherson. Andy's parents, Ron and Mary Harris, his brother, David Harris, and his many friends. At 6 a.m. on the 11th of May, Stuart Hutchison awoke John Krakauer and informed him that Harris was not in his tent, and he didn't seem to be in any of the other tents either. Krakauer was shocked and confused as he had seen him the previous day making it to Camp 4. It was only months later, during an interview with Martin Adams, a client of Mountain Madness, that Krakauer realized the climber he encountered was actually Adams and not Harris. Krakauer acknowledged his own responsibility for not recognizing Andy Harris' weakened state and irrational behavior, resulting from the effects of high altitude and oxygen deprivation. He stated that his own actions, or failure to act, played a direct role in the death of Andy Harris. No one is certain what happened to Doug Hansen that night, but it's been conjectured that Hall and Harris managed to get him down the ropes to a point about 50 vertical feet above the south summit, only to have him lose his footing and fall 7,000 feet down the sheer southwest pass. His ice axe was later found jammed into the ridge above the sheer face down which he is speculated to have fallen. What might have happened to Andy Harris remains even harder to discern. He was at the south summit with Hall on the night of May 10. His ice axe and jacket were found near Robb's body several days later. Before Hall died, he also mentioned that Harris had been with him, but was now missing. This implies that Harris died nearby. He experienced the effects of hypoxia, in which the brain is deprived of oxygen for too long. This led to disorientation and dementia. He was hallucinating while suffering from hypoxia. He seemed to believe that he was overheating, and so he took up his jacket, which led him to lose his balance and fall to his death. The death of Andy Harris stands as one of the most heart-wrenching events of the entire expedition. He could have survived the disaster had he not gone back to find his colleagues. Hearing by radio Hall's calls for help, Andy turned from the safety of descending to go back up toward the summit ridge to assist Robb and Doug Hansen. Despite the blizzard and his own exhaustion, in knowing that his only chance of survival lay in descending, he chose to go back up the mountain to try to help Hall and Hansen. To go to the aid of fellow climbers in the face of the most appalling condition was an outstanding act of bravery. It was his helpful nature, characterized by his unwavering willingness to aid others, ultimately led to his untimely demise. Whenever there was a need for volunteers or assistance with clients, Harris was someone to rely upon. Harris was survived by his parents, Ron and Mary Harris, his brother David Harris, and his fiancée Fiona McPherson at the time of his death. A memorial was erected a short distance from Gorakhshev, in the direction of the Everest base camp, to honor the fallen members of the adventure consultants who tragically lost their lives during the 1996 Everest disaster. This memorial stand is a tribute to Andy Harris, Robb Hall, Doug Hansen, and Yasuko Namba, serving as a solemn reminder of their enduring spirit and the sacrifices they made on their journey. In 1998, the New Zealand Geographic Board, in recognition of his remarkable contributions, named a peak at Victoria Land, Antarctica, after Harris. The peak is known as the Harris Peak and is located between Mount Hall and Ball Peak. Names bear significance to Harris' legacy. In 1999, Harris was awarded the New Zealand Bravery Star, a testament to his unwavering bravery and selflessness. In 2009, the New Zealand Mountain Guides Association initiated the Andy Harris Trophy to recognize him and those values he stood for. The trophy is presented on an annual basis for outstanding and significant contribution to guiding and recognition of the qualities that Andy characterized: commitment, bravery, and spirit. Francis Douglas Memorial College held a special tribute in Harris' honor in 2010. His parents and brother made an appearance. In the 2015 film Everest, Andy Harris was portrayed by actor Martin Henderson, immortalizing Harris' legacy on the big screen. Thank you all so much for watching.